Welcome to Inside the Margin. We are a nonprofit independent publication dedicated to environmental and climate justice journalism. We focus on investigative journalism, data-driven journalism, and we are so thrilled to have these folks here. Today's conversation will be focused on a feature that we published as a part of our fall issue called Deserted at the Border by Olga Loginova and Carolina Cuellar, which examine how families living across southern Arizona are navigating extreme heat, water scarcity, crumbling infrastructure, and political neglect, all while competing for increasingly limited federal resources. This is a story that's about climate, it's about borders, it's about dignity, and what happens when communities are left to often survive on their own. First, I'm happy to introduce Olga. She is an investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker who's passionate about telling stories about environmental justice, climate displacement, and human rights. She's the producer and reporter and host of the nonfiction narrative podcast Leaving the Island, which investigates the first federally funded climate change-driven community resettlement in the United States. Olga's work has appeared in a number of publications. Olga's many accomplishments include the 2023 Amnesty International Media Award. She's a fellow at the Logan Science Journalism Group, and she's a 2024 Joan Connor Fellow. Next, Carolina Cuellar, who's a bilingual journalist based in Tucson, Arizona. She covers South Arizona, and she previously reported on the border and immigration issues in the Rio Grande Valley for Texas Public Radio. She has a master's of science in science communication and worked as a laboratory researcher before pivoting to journalism. Brenda Olivia Sanchez is the executive director of SEAHEC and a longtime community health worker. She's dedicated to advancing health equity across Arizona's rural, border, and migrant communities. Since joining SEAHEC in 2019, she's led initiatives focused on CHW workforce development, public health education, and binational collaboration across Southern Arizona. Last but not least is Carolina Cortez, a community health worker with SEAHEC as well, and a prevention and family support specialist serving communities in Safford, Arizona, Graham County, and the San Carlos Reservation. With over 5 years of experience, she provides culturally and linguistically responsive mental health and prevention support to children, families, and immigrant communities. She's trained as a certified trauma support specialist. Carolina bridges language and cultural barriers to connect English and Spanish-speaking residents with critical resources grounded in both professional expertise and lived experience. And with that, let's dive in. Olga, I would like to start with you. You've reported extensively on climate displacement and environmental injustice. And you brought us this story, and I'm curious just sort of how did this story first come on your radar, and how did it sort of first begin to take shape?
I first came across the story, or not the story, but Colonias in 2021, 2022. I was a reporter at Columbia Journalism Investigations, and we had time to do a lot of research for our next investigation. We were looking into communities that needed climate resettlement. We were looking at at where the money goes. And while really combing through the research and academic papers and government reports, I stumbled on the word colonia. And when I started reading about it, it blew my mind. And first of all, it blew my mind because I had never heard about it. And I never can keep things to myself. That's why I'm in this profession. So I was literally walking around the newsroom and everyone I knew, and I was asking them, like, have you heard about colonias? Do you know what's going on there? And to my surprise, people were like people who were born in this country, they were saying no. And it just like I started reading more and more, and it was quite shocking what the information I was coming across. Unfortunately, my newsroom was focusing on a different topic, so we couldn't investigate it back then. But then again, I kept talking to people, and in 2023, I met Carolina. We were both doing HEFA training, the hazardous environment and first aid training through YWMF, and so I started talking to her and she's like, well, yeah, I've done work there. And so we kind of bonded over this. And then I pitched the story to you, Bryce. And I was thrilled when you found the topic interesting. So this is how we got here. It was 4 years of me talking about it.
And I'm so glad we got to do it. It's an extraordinary story. And I think, to your point, a lot of people are not familiar with Colonias. And Caro, I know you've spent much of your career reporting on the US Mexico border, first in Texas, now in Arizona. Can you help sort of define what is a colonia and why does this designation matter? And then you can also share a little bit after you met Olga and how did this sort of collaboration come to be, work at the margin and with Arizona Luminaria?
Yeah, of course. So colonias have sort of a colloquial definition, but also a federal definition. So federally, there is a designation of a community being a colonia. In order to be so, it has to be 150 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. It has to be a rural community that lacks infrastructure. There are certain parameters on its distance from a major metropolitan area. And there's different parameters in terms of the quality of infrastructure, ranging from water, septic, environmental hazards, stuff like that. So, Colonia, in essence, is a rural community that was built without any infrastructure existing in it. And by state to state, it varies how they came to be. But really, sort of the common story is it is land where people settled, people who worked, settled, and were not given any of the infrastructure that we take for granted when we move into a house. So any sort of water system, any sort of septic system, any sort of like flood prevention system, drainage, that type of thing. And it matters a lot in the context of having that designation because there's funding associated with it. It became such an issue in the 70s that the government started the process of recognizing, and they didn't complete this until the 90s, where there was a lot of public health crises happening because of the conditions in colonias. And so the government had to intervene and say, we're setting aside money in order to provide infrastructure for these communities. And so having that designation gives you weight because it gives you the opportunity to apply for money, for grant, and for aids that helps advance your community. In terms of the story and how it came to be, so Olga told me that she had found help with, or she had found interest through the margin, and that she was wanting to do this story. And it was like a few years after that. And so I wasn't working in Texas anymore, but I was working in Arizona. And I was like, I'm not in Texas, but I'm in Arizona and we have colonias and I've been wanting to report on it. I went to a colonia event which is actually where I met Brenda, is through this event, where they were doing something. And I was like, there's so much richness here. There's so much reporting opportunity. It's like, there's such fantastic communities and they don't get any attention and it's egregious. So when Olga told me like we can work on this, I was like, yes, please give me your attention, give me your skills, and we can do something really cool in Arizona. And I know the people to talk to. So it was very serendipitous, and I'm so happy that we were able to work with y'all to get this out there.
We are obviously very thrilled as well, and we're excited to continue that reporting in 2026. I'm curious, just for those who may not have had an opportunity to read the story yet, I encourage everyone to go back and read the story. It's called Deserted at the Border. But for those who haven't read it yet, Olga and Carolina, do you mind kind of giving an overview as to what some of the major findings were, and what did you learn sort of on the ground that surprised you initially? And when did you kind of realize that, oh my goodness, there's something more here?
When we started reporting the story, we had a method and we wanted to follow the data that exists. And we worked with a number of government reports and also nonprofits, major nonprofits that work with communities, including RCAP. Let me try to decipher that. It's Rural Community Association Partnership. I might be wrong and I apologize in advance, but it's along those lines. And so that organization, which is a network of six biggest nonprofits working with the rural communities and colonias, they have assembled the most up-to-date data on communities across the 4 states, and colonias are in 4 states along the border. It's Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And also in their reports, and they did extensive reports, they created lists of communities without access to public water services. So we decided to follow that data. We created lists of communities and we decided to investigate or like gather our own data of what was going on there. Further on, we decided to focus on communities that were created around very distinct industries, agriculture and mining. And those are prominent industries in Arizona. And so we were in Carolina's tiny car that was driving around Arizona, visiting communities. And what we found is, to be honest, nothing is what it seems in government reports. That's what we like. I think for me, one of the, besides the obvious, the experiences of being on the ground and talking to people and seeing how life is and what it means to have no infrastructure, what it means when you have no roads, or when your community is overrun by stray dogs, or like people from other communities go there to dump their trash, or like major like old appliances, and so your home turns into a junkyard. So it's one thing to see that, to talk to people who, you know, put like, I don't think it's like egregious, but they put foil in their windows to keep their houses, and most houses are manufactured homes, which are not as well weatherized as like built homes. So, but how people manage to be there, but still love those places and tend to them, and trying to create the present and the future for themselves and their families. And then see how over and over again these communities fall through the cracks. And sometimes for some it's a bad thing, but for some those cracks create opportunities. For example, somehow communities that have so much, that are pretty affluent, like they're rich communities, they have vineyards, they're still considered colonias and they're eligible for federal grants. And then we have communities that have much less and they cannot get anything. Like, for example, in Clifton, which is one of the communities we featured in our story, and like, I'm going to wrap up and pass it on to Carolina in a second. So when I was talking to the like Clifton, not a secret, is also a seat of Greenlee County. And so I was able to talk to the government officials, and they said, like, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the people to apply for grants. And it's like, when you think about that, they have needs. Like every community we've been to, they have needs. Like in order to be considered a community, a colonia, you have to have specific list of needs. So do they. It's a fantastic town. It's beautiful, beautiful place. It's like over 100 years old. You can see the intro, you can see the houses, you can see the streets. It's beautiful. Nature is beautiful there, but the houses are kind of falling apart. They have a major issues with if I remember correctly, like cleaning up debris from the river when it floods after the rains. Then of course, like their plumbing needs like major upgrades and whatnot, and the drainage is problematic, and they don't have people to sit down and write a grant. So, and lack of a capacity, administrative capacity, is one of the big issues that also people who we've been talking on the government level were also telling us. So it's, again, small communities, lots of needs, not enough time, people, and money to take care of it, even if somewhere theoretically the money exists.
I agree with everything that Olga said. I also think that I noticed the privilege that it can be to even have the opportunity to say that you need help, to even have that ability, like you were saying, is having that infrastructure. That what I was really impressed with when I went to a colonia in Arizona through an event that was hosted by SEAHEC was the importance of like the infrastructure that having an organizational presence in the community had, because there's people who have needs and there's people in these communities that are like, we need something, but just having a space where people can get together and, you know, have food distributions or have a mobile health clinic makes all of the difference, because it's people getting in community, people talking about what their needs are, people organizing. And these are hardworking communities where people are working all day. Like during harvest season, people are working 12 hours a day, like 24 hours and shifts. Like time is a privilege, and having, you know, just that space where they can commune and, you know, do their planning is so important. I think I was also kind of struck by how arbitrary the label of colonia can seem. Like we passed by, I always actually live in Pima County, and Pima County is one of the counties that had a bunch of colonias that were undesignated recently because of a stipulation that a colonia can't be within a certain distance of a population center that has, I think, more than 1 million people. Correct me if I'm wrong, Olga. So there was a lot of colonias that used to be in Pima County in like 2023 that were now undesignated. I drive around the county and I go through the more rural parts, and there's places that I look at and I say that's a colonia by all intents and purposes, and it's not classified as such. And so I think what I gather from speaking to people and also from, like speaking to government officials and people who have done this work for a long time is that that needs to be reevaluated because it's not necessarily fair how these designations are made. Like Olga and I, we went to as many colonias as we could in person, and we tried to talk to people. And there was communities where I would say that maybe the need didn't seem as great as maybe communities that are not labeled as colonias that are near me. So I think that that really stuck with me.
Brenda, something that stuck out to me as well about Olga and Caro's reporting is just the lack of governance structures that exist in many colonias on the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona, and to both of their points as well, just that sort of the lack of infrastructure, lack of representation, and then to hear how an organization like SEAHEC is able to kind of support in many ways, come in and really raise the profile of these communities that otherwise often go unseen and unheard. Can you talk a little bit more about SEAHEC? How did you come into this work, and what kind of work does your organization do?
Definitely. Thank you. SEAHEC is a local nonprofit based in Nogales, Arizona. We serve 5 counties: Graham, Greenlee, Cochise, Santa Cruz, and Pima counties. Our service area does include many colonias. SEAHEC has been around for 40 years, and our work really has focused on advocating and putting front and center the needs of our border communities and specifically our rural communities. In our line of work, we are a community health worker workforce agency. We are really front and center. Community health workers are the bridge between resources that exist in the community and community members that are in need of these resources. We are that trusted member in the community that many times folks don't have, especially in today's political environment and the communities that we serve. Many times folks aren't able to speak on their behalf. For various reasons. So as community health workers, one of our biggest roles is to be the advocate for those individuals. And that really is the role that SEAHEC plays in many of the colonias that we serve. As Carolina mentioned, we are in a privileged space where we are at the table in spaces where we're able to speak not for the communities, but really on behalf of them. And when we are able to also bring them front and center in these conversations, many times the needs of our communities go unnoticed. They get pushed to the back burner, or they're seen as not the priority. But for individuals, this is their livelihood. This is them not having access to clean water, to basic needs such as healthcare or food. And so a role that SEAHEC plays is we try our best to find grants that can provide support to these spaces. And as organizations, we are pretty much fighting each other in terms of we are all going for the same funding sources, and the amount of money that's available is very limited. But the needs of our communities are very broad and very, very unique to each region. Colonias in Santa Cruz County will be very different to colonias in Pima County and Cochise County. The demographics of the individuals will be different. The infrastructure in each of the colonias will be very different. And because of the changes of the designation of colonias, that directly impacts those communities' ability to get funding. Organizations that were getting funding to provide support to colonias that no longer are deemed colonias, we lose that funding. There's a gap, and it's a trickle effect that we see.
Carolina Cortez, do you mind sort of sharing what daily life is for someone who lives in a colonia? What are the considerations or choices that they often have to make that maybe someone living in a more urban setting or in a suburban setting with basic infrastructure doesn't have to make?
I've been privileged enough to work with SEAHEC as a CHW, and I got to see Greenlee County. That's one of the counties that we serve at this time. Just going out to the communities and going to the food pantries, you see a great number of people that speak about how their light bill is so high. So it's either light bill or food or fixing the faucet or a broken window. We have a lot of community members that are vulnerable at this time, elderly community members as well, that say that if I fix the window, it's going to cost me this much. So that's the money that I have to use for food or for other basic needs. And their income is so low that they choose food, they choose survival. A lot of these buildings are falling apart. They're up hills and the roads are not the best. And a lot of the people we have no transportation for individuals that are vulnerable in our communities, and they have to walk down those hills. Uh, it's a lot of broken homes. When we went up there with Olga and Carolina, we saw a lot of infrastructures that are just abandoned, and people it's not neglect, it's just the resources are not there.
Caro and Olga, you opened the story with basically an anecdote about a young couple trying to race to the hospital with a newborn on the way. Can you tell us a little bit about who these folks are and just sort of not only is there a lack of infrastructure in colonias, but the distance to just sort of basic necessities like healthcare is also a challenge. Can you tell us a little bit about that family in particular and what has happened since?
The family is Alfonso and Anel, and they're now 3 kids. And they live in a colonia in an agricultural community, and it's a colonia that's existed for a while. It used to mostly cater to workers who worked on the tomato, I think the tomato farm, and now they have like a combination of people who work with tomatoes and people who work with pistachios, I believe, pistachio orchards. And Alfonso, he works full time. Anel is a stay-at-home mom. And they live approximately an hour and a half from their closest medical center, where Anel had to give birth to her baby. And with it came a lot of challenges. Her doctor needed to have asked or wanted to have her induced instead of letting her, go into labor naturally because of the distance and the fear that she would have to give birth on the way to the hospital. And so their distance and their limit and the limits they have in terms of access to healthcare shaped that pregnancy journey. I mean, you were also talking about like the prenatal checkups they had to do, which near the end become weekly. So that's them driving an hour and a half. That's gas money. That's wear and tear on their vehicle. The roads out there aren't the best. And it's stressful. I mean, they have 2 kids at home, like they needed to find care for. So we opened up with them because we spent a lot of time with them, and they were a good representation of, the people, we're talking about is people who work, people who have full lives and want to have access to everything that we do. It's just a lot harder for them because of the situation that they find themselves in.
For many communities, especially for families who are expecting children, Tucson or like some bigger city is the only option for them to go to deliver their baby. And actually, there is an ongoing research right now in Arizona that looks for correlation between the distance to hospital, specifically delivery units, and the health outcomes, both for mothers and daughters. I will actually pass it on to Brenda, but like this is what we wanted to look into for our possibly next story. Yeah, but I'd love Brenda to share more about it.
That is one of the needs that we see in our communities. Many of our smaller rural communities do have urgent care, small ERs, but the infrastructure is very limited, and the amount of specialists that are in person in these spaces isn't they aren't there 7 days a week, 24 hours. If they do have a specialist, maybe it's once a week for 4 hours, or they have telehealth, but a birthing mother could be in labor for hours. Then there's the different layers of individuals who are living in colonias in rural communities are at a higher risk of having comorbidities, especially if they during pregnancies. So they're already at a higher risk for complications. Many of the colonias that we work in don't have labor and delivery rooms. Folks are having to travel up to Tucson or Phoenix. The distances are long. There's multiple layers of insecurities that also come with our highways, the infrastructure for transportation during monsoon season. Many of these roads are washed away or there is flooding. The distances could be from an hour to 3 hours. And then for many of the folks, especially for our agriculture workers, being able to ask for a day off to go take their expecting mother to a doctor's appointment is not realistic. And the support system that they have many times, especially if they have multiple kids, who's going to stay with the kids while the other person goes to the doctors. It does make it very difficult. Many times they rely on telehealth, but even telehealth isn't always the most accessible. And that is then specific for folks who are eligible for healthcare or are able to afford healthcare, because then we also have a whole group of community members who don't have access to healthcare and are having to rely on free clinics or sliding fee scales within our local federally qualified health centers. And there isn't local federal qualified health centers or free clinics in all of our communities. Most of those are going to be in our larger, more urban settings.
And I also wanted to add, like, this all happens in a state that experiences more days of extreme heat than any other state, right? I think 39 more days with temperatures over 100 degrees than like the rest of the country. This is like the data from one of the government reports that we have, and like extreme heat, of course, also impacts pregnancies and deliveries and the health outcomes for people.
You mentioned the extreme heat, and Brenda, you also mentioned just sort of the monsoons and sort of knowing that, and we published basically a climate risk map and with the story as well, basically showing how communities in colonias are at higher climate risk compared to the average person in the United States, and how risks of drought, how risks of heat, how monsoons all and flooding impact these communities. And with so many gaps in infrastructure, whether it be public infrastructure and healthcare, there were some other narratives in the story that y'all told of just sort of how communities come together and that there are moments of mutual aid, creativity, and this word gets overused and often misused, but resistance in some ways. Folks have been able to sort of rise to sort of try to fill some of those gaps, kind of fill some of those cracks that emerge in some of the public infrastructure. Caro and Olga, do you mind sort of sharing an anecdote from the story? One that comes to mind for me is, for example, if there's a fire in the community there's one community in particular that knows how to respond pretty quickly in the event of a fire. Do you mind sharing that story?
Alfonso, which is the couple that we opened with, like he told me a story about how there was a fire in his community and it would take so long for the emergency response to come that they used one of the water trucks they have in that orchard to put out the fire themselves. And and there's no fire hydrants in Winchester Heights. So that's just like one of the things that, they just have to take care of on their own. But, they're aware of each other as a community. They know each other. And so they have each other's backs in that way. And in a way, like their employer does too, because they let them use the truck in order to do that. That's one example that was very glaring. I mean, another example could be with the clinic that was in Clifton, was it Clifton? Where like one of the residents of the community, she had been working as a PA, I believe, for another private clinic, and she was just like, hey, my community could use some help. Can I start my own private clinic out of a high school that's nearby? And so that's how they got that clinic started, and now they have a local source of medical help that is not a crazy, egregious distance from them. So those are just some examples of how people in the community create opportunities to help each other out.
One thing, that clinic was in San Simon, correct?
San Simon, my bad.
Fact checking on the fly.
Fact checking live. You'll see how it gets done. No, I appreciate that a lot. I think those are good examples. And Carolina Cortez, I mean, as a community health worker, you're also part of that fabric that kind of fills in a lot of these gaps. Do you mind also sort of speaking to the mutual aid that you sort of witnessed and contribute to, and that creativity that you've seen on the ground in communities?
Yes, of course. Even though it's a small county and it's a colonia, everybody takes care of everybody. Our elderly cannot drive 3 hours and a half. Right now from Graham County, to drive to Tucson is 2 hours and a half right now to 3 hours and a half due to construction. And for somebody has been waiting for a specialist to be seen by a specialist down in Tucson because the specialists here book up so quick and they only come once a week or once a month. Somebody steps up and it could be a neighbor and say, hey, you know what? Today's my day off. I'll take you, even SEAHEC, when I was Breast Cancer Awareness Month, a lot of the women and males that were in the pantries didn't know how to do a checkup at home, and we were teaching them how to do it. And there were so many questions like, Carolina, can a male get breast cancer? And I was like, yes, everybody could get it. This is something that you could do in your home and something that could help you and ease your mind. And if there's something wrong, please seek medical attention. Go to your nearest doctor, to your provider. A lot of the community steps up even in any type of crisis, even with the food uh, being so low right now at the pantries. They're stepping up and opening their pantries to other homes and taking donations, clothes, anything that could be useful for the community. So it's not impacted as hard, but we see the impact every single day, going out to the pantries, going out to these food giveaways. It's not the same as before. Everything, there are lacking funding. Everybody's lacking funding right now and lacking more information on how to write grants. A lot of the deal here is that a lot of the community, we feel that they are doing okay, but you always check on your neighbor in a small community because you know how their needs are and what to expect.
Carolina, you mentioned just sort of the grants, and Brenda, I'm hoping because you brought this up earlier as well as something that SEAHEC is able to sort of support in, and Olga and Caro in your reporting, something that was particularly alarming, and I think really came out of the reporting was just the extent to which a lot of these grants that communities have received thus far are really in jeopardy under this new administration and this new Congress in DC, and budgets are being rewritten and definitions are being redrawn. Brenda, do you mind just from a forward-looking perspective, literally into the next year, um, can you speak to like just some of those threats and what you're seeing from the Hill as with regard to why these grants have been so important and so impactful, even with the major limitations that we've all heard tonight, but also knowing that some of those grants might disappear very soon?
It is a sad reality that we are currently experiencing in public health. It is my personal belief that we as a profession are under attack. We are being looked at as if we don't know what we're talking about, as if we forget that we recently came out of a pandemic, and if it wouldn't have been for public health professionals, many folks wouldn't be alive today. And has been large budget cuts across the nation, but specifically in our rural, underserved border communities, we have been highly impacted. We are navigating unprecedented times. We are getting termination letters left and right with no proper documentation as to why it is that our funding is being cut. Both at the local, state, and federal level, we are having to diversify our funding. Before, if you had a grant, especially a federal grant, you were pretty sure that you were going to get what was in your contract. That isn't the reality that we have today. We are getting terminations without proper explanation other than it doesn't align with current administration priorities. Even though in our current administration priorities, rural communities are supposed to be front and center, but that isn't what is being translated to the reality. SEAHEC and other organizations have been impacted these past few months by federal cuts, and it has a trickle effect. It impacts the organization, which then impacts the ability for the organization to continue to provide services to community members. It impacts the livelihood of our workforce. It impacts the livelihood of the communities that we serve, individuals who are dependent on these services. Again, it's at the local, state, and national level. We as organizations have come together and tried our best to share resources, but that sharing of resources can only go so far because it's both small organizations who are being impacted, but also, our health departments, especially like our federally qualified health centers, who predominantly are the ones that are serving folks who are in these more underserved, low-income households. They got large budget cuts, which means that now people aren't able to access free healthcare services, which then if people aren't healthy, they're not able to work. It impacts our overall workforce. It is a much larger picture than, oh, we are trying to save money for the US in this way. We don't look at the impact that we're just going to cut 200 grants. But those 200 grants serve a much larger population. It impacts school settings. It impacts different workplaces. Our current funding for our communities is much limited. The areas that we're able to focus on in terms of the type of healthcare services that we focus on, or the health issues, also are much limited. The populations that we can focus on are also much limited, and it is really coming from folks who aren't in the community, who have never set foot in our communities, who aren't even in our state, and they're the ones who are making the decisions that directly impact the livelihood of the communities that we serve.
Brenda, you mentioned just sort of that these are grants not only at the federal level, but at the county or local and state level as well. And Olga and Caro, I know in your reporting, you actually interviewed county officials, state officials, even federal officials. What are they saying with regard to grants, with regard to the challenges that colonials are facing? And I know oftentimes they're pointing the finger at each other. It's just the lack of accountability here it's somewhat maddening.
When I spoke to the director of a department that administers grants on the county level in Cochise County, I think she was pretty candid. She said there's not enough money from the state. And also when the county that actually, from what I've heard, tries to do an outreach, tries to go to the communities and see their needs and what can be done, when they apply for the money, the communities have to compete with each other. The communities in need have to compete with each other. And also, there are so many hoops that you need to jump through as a community to qualify for anything and everything. For example, in Winchester Heights, the county wanted to work with the individual homeowners whose houses were flooding during rain events and monsoons, and they were working on the applications. They applied to the state, and because they were like applying for a grant to fix the houses, but since the houses were kind of in a floodplain, they were rejected because it was not in compliance with some environmental standard. Or the state did not seem it was possible to award the money. And so that happens all the time. And of course, when the set-asides go away, it's becoming even harder. And when we go and look at the federal level, the HUD set-aside is not the only pot of money. And it's also not a major pot of money. It's
Olga, sorry to interrupt, but do you mind specifying what does that set aside mean? What is the HUD set aside?
So earlier today in the conversation, Carolina mentioned that in the 90s, federal government decided to set aside a specific pot of money that was administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development for communities. It is called Colonia Set Aside. So every year, HUD sends money to the 4 states, and they can decide, or like they basically distribute them to the communities in need. So those communities in need have to compete. It's competitive, and there's a certain percentage is between 5% in California and 10% in the other 3 states. Yes, and so yeah, it's a set number. Again, we know that many communities, according to the reports, up to 60% of all colonias are on the path of losing the status, which means they're on the path of losing the money. And there is an effort, there's a bill on the House floor right now proposed by the Texas Senator Tony Gonzalez to amend that. I cannot quote the name of the bill, but basically it's a bill to protect the funding for colonias by amending this requirement of the colonias being within a very specific metropolitan statistical area that cannot cross the threshold of 1 million residents. Besides that money, there are other streams of money. And so it's kind of like, in a way, musical chairs. It's kind of, you need to apply for so many things to get what you need. And it's honestly, it's exhausting. It's exhausting for everyone. And each agency, especially right now, this year, nobody knows what's going on. Like I was talking to the people at RCAP and they were saying, well, we don't know. Like we know that this particular agency has the money, but their workforce has been, decreased by 40%. So there are no people to basically work with the communities, to administer the grants, to communicate with the colonias, nobody, like they don't communicate with the colonias, but with the nonprofits and other organizations that work with colonias. So yeah, I would say the system is pretty strained. And it's great when the county can apply on behalf of the community, when the colonias are incorporated. But then we have communities that are not incorporated, which means that they're left to fend for themselves, really. No matter which way you look at it, it's difficult. I think actually if you're unincorporated, the county can apply for it. But again, it's hard. And so what we're left with is you need a strong community with a strong leadership, like a colonia, that has someone who is a volunteer, because colonias don't have their own governance for the most part. So you need someone who chooses to not only have their job, go to work, have their family, but also find enough hours in the day to research and figure out to speak English, to research, to apply, and to make this up. We all apply for grants. It's very difficult. So they also need to apply for those same grants and do it correctly so that they can get something. And I think it's just, it's too much to ask of people who have pretty hard lives, to be honest.
What Olga said is correct. It is a multi-layer issue. And it starts at the top, though. It starts at the federal government, right? A lot of the legislation specifically around Colonia is federally dictated. So if there's problems up there, there's going to be problems going down as well.
As we are winding down to the end of the conversation, I'm curious, Brenda and Carolina Cortez, if you can reflect on just sort of what this kind of reporting and storytelling means to you all, to colonias. I mean, when we were first setting out and doing research on colonias, I was really surprised just the extent to which there isn't much reporting on literally hundreds of thousands of people who live in colonias on the U.S.-Mexico border, not only in Arizona, but in several other states, whether it be California, Texas, and New Mexico. Can you just speak to the importance of this kind of storytelling, this kind of reporting, and as we embark on doing some more work in this space, would just love to hear reflections from both of you as to how important and how meaningful how this can be.
I thought it was very important to bring light to the needs of these colonias, because with funding being taken away, nobody sees the impact in society, in those societies, in that community. Not only in healthcare, food-wise, everything goes down. And when you have a colonia that has so many needs and they're applying for all these grants and they get none, or they could apply for 2 or 3 and they still get denied, and then you have a little bit of funding and then it gets taken away from you, it's a big impact in the communities. What I thought they were going to I was gonna be nervous talking about our communities here, but it was a great experience and to show them and to actually bring in people to see that these people are human beings and we are lacking services and that we are in need and that we need to be able to speak up for them for a little bit, and say what their needs are. And Olga and Carolina coming in and putting a light on it, I hope it helps with funding and to restore a little bit more of benefits going this way instead of taking them away.
I definitely echo Carolina's sentiments. I think it's sometimes in our field, we talk about statistics, we talk about numbers, but we don't put a face and name to the experiences. And I strongly believe that this story really humanized the experiences of individuals living in colonias. And sometimes that's what we need to have those strong conversations and important conversations that it is a pregnant mother on the other side of the screen. It is someone who has their own livelihood and that's their community. That's for them, that's home. And we as outsiders may look at that colonia differently, but to them, that's all they know. And that is to them the best opportunity that they have for their families. And through us being able to talk about these communities in that way and not in a negative way, looking only at the barriers or the negative aspects, but also the assets and that sense of community and resilience and familiarism that comes with colonias. I think that's one of the beautiful things of colonias. Colonias stick together. It doesn't matter what's going on externally. People are going to come together and provide their neighbor food, check in on each other, and make sure that together they survive. It's more about survival. And you don't get that in our larger communities. We get tied into all these other things of fast-paced life and focusing on other things. But when that's something that I really love about my work and being able to be accepted by community members into their homes and their colonias is that sense of really community and sense of purpose. This story really has shed light on communities that purposefully are ignored. And it is our responsibility as individuals in privileged spaces to speak up and to advocate for those who realistically aren't going to be let to come into the rooms and sit at the tables and actually express their needs. I think that it's our goal at SEAHEC to be able to ensure that the community members are at the table, but while we work jointly to get to that space, I'm proud that my team is able to sit at the table and speak on behalf of the communities that we serve.
When Olga and Carolina came to Greeley County, the first thing I said, it's a beautiful place because I live in this county. Oh, you're gonna love it. We do have some problems, but it's amazing. That's how I started it. And I was like, I I love what Miss Brenda said because it is true. We all stick together, and even though we live here, this is the most amazing place for me. I thought it coming from Los Angeles to this place is like so different, and I just thought it was the most beautiful place. So when I introduce it, I say, yeah, I live in the most amazing place. It's like Twilight here. And um, so when they came in, even though we do have problems, I do introduce my county as the best county, and it is one of the best. And Graham and Greeley County are one of the hardworking people communities here. I've seen so many hardworking people, but that do struggle with a lot of issues and healthcare issues.
Thank you for sharing the pride and just really rings through and the work that you all do is extraordinary and I hope people look into it and support it. And Olga and Carolina, I'm hoping if y'all can just sort of leave us with any sort of final thoughts or final words, especially as you all are continuing this reporting into 2026.
There was a moment when we were on the road and there were three of us in the car. There was Carolina, there was Ash, and there was I, and I realized that
And Ash was our photographer for context.
we were either immigrants or children of immigrants or both. And being there at that moment, in time in the country where we are. I think it felt both visceral but also empowering on behalf of the people who we were reporting about and on and for, because we are continuing the tradition of telling these stories of people who are building this country. And I'm also very grateful to Carolina. I don't speak Spanish, so without her, the story would not have happened. I will learn Spanish maybe in the next how many years? Oh, I will just work with Carolina.
It was a joy to report. I think one thing that I do want to say is that the story is not over. I mean, especially right now, we're in a very dynamic time politically, but also environmentally. There are various risk factors that affect people who live, and not even just people in colonias, people who live in places with poor infrastructure or lower socioeconomic situations. So like this is sort of a look into what could happen in the future and to other communities if we don't help people now. And there's a lot of aid that these communities need. And I'm hoping that shedding some light just to have the conversations of what is a colonia, just to start talking about the reasons why these communities exist and the reasons why these communities exist in the richest country in the world is a step in the right direction. But I'm hoping that people, just like in Texas, how that bill was put in, like we can have some sort of action at the state level where there's some recognition of like rural communities in Arizona and there is some recognition that they need help. I also wanted to mention that the colonias are border communities, but they're also tribal communities, especially here in Arizona. There's a lot of colonias on tribal lands that require assistance. And there's also a lot of communities that are like colonias on tribal lands that don't fall within that 150-mile distance from the US-Mexico border that have the same, if not more needs than other communities that we reported on. So this is a big issue. This was a very introductory story, but I do hope it gives people pause and it makes them want to look into their communities a little bit more and look into like what a colonia is and like think about the role that our government plays in helping these communities.
Thank you. You're right. This story is not over. And I'm excited and honored that we'll continue to get to report on the Olga, the image of you, Caro, and Ash in the car together is a powerful one. And thank you for raising that. Carolina Cortez and Brenda Sanchez, thank you both so much, and to SEAHEC just for being here, for supporting and all the work that you all do, and offering your insights and expertise this evening. It really means a lot, and I think people will learn and have gleaned a lot from it. And to Olga and Carolina, Arizona Luminaria, and to Jasmine Williams, our producer behind the scenes. Thank you all so much. I'm so glad that we've gotten to be in community together and looking forward to continue working together in the future. And for everyone who joined and will join, please check out the story. It's on the margin.us. It's also Arizona Luminaria, where you can also find it in Spanish. Sign up for our newsletter and consider supporting our work. We're running a news match campaign where everyone's donation is tripled through the end of the year. And so if you want to support journalism and storytelling like this, now is a great time to do that. We don't shy away from these important conversations, this sort of broader commitment to environmental justice. We are always going to look at these issues, no matter how harmful or how complex, and really find solutions from those who are on the margins and really try to lift those up. And so, again, thank you all so much for being here. Wishing everyone a happy holidays and a happy new year. And join us for our next Inside the Margin sometime in 2026.